We're with Jim Patterson here today. He is our industrial arts tech ed retired manager here. He was in control of this wood shop and several other parts of the industrial arts wing here in the 1946 edition. This edition, along with the 1924 edition, are the ones that are going to be removed. So this is the room that you spent a good part of your 30-some years of teaching here. And the background is a tool case that Jim was very meticulous about making sure everything was put back where it belonged. Jim, what memories do you have in this room?
The tools itself you see here, a lot of them were here when I came in January of 1970. The first day of school for me was in January. Of course, the semesters ended, not like the colleges end before Christmas, but it ended in late January. And it was 20 below zero here, my introduction to Sevastopol. So, but a lot of the tools are still here. You can see, and I used to test the kids, to give them a test as to what was in the cabinet, what was on the right door and the left door, and of course the main tool cabinet. And they had to know that. They had to know where they were. So hopefully things got put back. We have the main workbenches here that you can see. We used to have a rack for pipe clamps that was over there, but this has been built much, much better, much handier. And we have a series of what are called bar clamps as well as the pipe clamps. And if you go to a hardware store now, most people will buy the pipe clamps because any length of pipe, you have a clamp. The workbenches, of course, we have a planer. This machine was bought in the 1970s. It takes a piece of rough lumber and makes it smooth, like you can see here on this sample here of the cutting board. Okay. We have a joiner. We used to have two of them. There was a smaller one that sat over there. This one here is a joiner. And what this does, we'll put a straight edge. If you're joining boards edge to edge, you would run it through this way. And it would make that edge nice and smooth. Again, for joining pieces. The small little jigsaw over there is new to me. In other words, it's been here for at least 18 years. This is a sander right here. You put the wood through. And the problem with the planer is that if you're doing certain woods, you send the wood through and it will chip. Okay? This will not, obviously. It'll be like an electric belt sander. We have a wood lathe right here. This is surplus World War II. And of the lathes that we had, over the time we had 3 other lathes in here, wood lathes. And this one is the best made and the most sturdy of all the lathes we had.
And many of you boys that had class here, this is the lathe that you created things on and probably had some pretty exciting experiences with.
Yes, we did. Right now there's a faceplate on there that means that someone was probably turning a wooden bowl on here. The wood would be attached to this, what's called a faceplate, and then again by turning the machine on and shifting and so on, you would use these various chisels, and these are not your ordinary chisels, these are intended for wood turning. We have a disc sander here and a belt sander right here. Those were here for a long, long time before I came. An oscillating spindle sander right here. This not only turns, but then it goes up and down. So that when you're using it, again, you're not wearing out only one piece of the sandpaper, or technically abrasive paper. It's not made out of sand. These are new to me. We had other table saws in here. I think these might have been purchased a year ago. So this would be the second year of that operation. Back over against the wall is a shorts rack where, again, small pieces of wood would be put in. And then we had a radial arm saw here. And that one apparently either wore out, it was here when I came, and this Makita has replaced that. And it's not technically a radial arm saw, but it does come down and then again goes back. because there's a pivoting point back there. Hooked up to the exhaust system. Again, you can see that a lot of the equipment and machinery here are hooked up to that system to, again, expel it out into a dust collector that's out in the back. The old drill press, and believe it or not, this is my table that I put on over the years. And again, it was to prevent the process of drilling into the table, the steel table, and you would drill into this and you would have a fence that would attach on here as a guide. So that when you're drilling a series of holes, like for a cribbage board or something like that, all your holes hopefully would be in a straight line. This is old bleachers right here. If you remember the old wooden bleachers in the gym, the high school gym, these apparently are remnant pieces from when those were replaced with the metal bleachers that we have now. In the back room, this is all new. After a period of time, this was my classroom. And there were desks in here, or tables, that the kids sat at. Lumber storage, of course, up here, plywood storage over here. The lockers, you can see where the lockers have been moved, the difference between the old building and the extension out, where you go to the masonry block. When I first came here, there was a garage door here, and that's been blocked up since then. The cabinets that are in here are simply storage cabinets for paint, varnish, those types of things, stains. Again, to be appropriate with OSHA. One of the students, that was a male, a boy, young man, here had a class ring from his girlfriend, and she went to Sturgeon Bay. And the boys at that time, instead of wearing it on their finger, would wear it on a string around the neck. Okay, and what he did was lose it, but had no idea where. Okay, well, about 5 years before I retired, we were doing some remodeling back here, and I moved that A-frame storage rack. And lo and behold, there was something shiny in the sawdust. Again, it had been moved for 50, 60 years, who knows. And there was the ring. I picked it up, and I looked at it, and it had the initials SS on it. And it belonged to, through some research, my next door neighbor worked at Sturgeon Bay in the office, and her and Tom Stover, he was the guidance counselor at Sturgeon Bay for a long time, went through some old yearbooks. And it had the year that she graduated, and it was like 1967, something like that, 68. Anyway, they found out that there were two people that had those initials, two girls, because it was a girl's ring. And they did some research through the yearbooks, as I mentioned before, found it, and one of the girls still lived in town. And someone said, "Oh, I know her, she's married to so-and-so." Well, she worked at the annex of the library in town, which used to be the skating shelter in the wintertime. That's that building. And called her up, and I said, "I think I have something that belongs to you." And I explained who I was and so on. And within an hour, she was out here, and I was able to take the ring that I had, her school ring, and slip it on her finger. And it still fit.
I'm sorry.
But the part I didn't tell you last night was they married and are still married. So that's a good story. The old building, okay, this is the wall that they, and this projects out from there, okay, toward the new gym, or, the gym that was put on in '65. So.
And Lisa, one window is kept open because that exhaust system out there, if you don't take care of it and it overflows, you get sawdust flying all over.
Especially if you're using the planer, because that generates a lot of shavings. And that's why that was there, so that you could observe. And when I first had this was put in and back in the 70s, I had 3 barrels, 55-gallon drums that I would rotate. And then we would take them down, you know, and then put them in the dumpster and so on. There's only one left. So what happened to the other 2, nobody knows. Well, you got a burning barrel or whatever at home. And I was standing right over there where that sander is, and one of the students was running the board through in his thumb, and right here, okay, not cut it off or anything like that, because I never had an amputation or anything like that, but he cut into the thumb, right there at the knuckle. And that's the only serious accident I had. I've had some scrapes and things like that where kids weren't paying attention and would do that, you know, but that was the only serious one I had. The students at that time had insurance. Okay, in other words, this was, I think, over and above the family deductible, whatever the family had. That the school had insurance on them. Just same with athletics.
Okay.
If they were playing football or basketball and got hurt, volleyball, whatever, had to go to the doctor, that was covered with school insurance. Now, whether they have that or not, I don't know anymore.
I think they do. They have a special.
Like an umbrella type policy of some sort, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I should mention, this type of saw they have today, this table saw, you can stop with a hot dog. This will not keep going and
Right.
cut somebody's fingers off anymore. It's got specialized laser lights that,
Electric brake, yeah.
electric brakes.
Yeah. And a lot of this safety has come about with OSHA, trying to make the workplace safer, obviously, for the students, but also, you know, in industry the same way. Yeah. In this little room right here, talking about this fire door, this again was going back toward the old building.
This is a door from the Leon Fire Company, and it was put in between the 1924 and the 1946 edition to keep them separate in case there was a chance of a fire. It would not bother either building, either which way ever it came.
Right. This was a partition and a glass, and the door was in here, and my little office was right here at one time. And I kept my books and things like that in here. When Mike was in school in ag, that was the ag room behind me here, through that door. And now it's a 6th grade classroom. But there was a sink here, and they would do milk testing as part of the ag program back a number of years ago. I don't know if you can tell, this is a birch log, okay? This was cut down, the log, in 1960. Think how many years ago that was. And when you do wood turning on the lathe, what you want to do is paint the ends with any old paint, black, blue, green, doesn't make any difference. What you're trying to do is seal the pores of the end grain. If you've ever seen logs that have been split or getting ready to split, they'll check and crack, okay? But by doing this, you can see that there's not one crack on the inside here. And one of the things I did in school, this is up in Superior, was to cut pieces off of here about that thick. And then I drew on there, after I sanded them perfectly smooth, was the various lines on there to represent how logs are cut into lumber, between quarter sawn, plane sawn, and so on, so the kids could actually see how that was done. And you can see this now was cut in 1960, cut it down, and again, there's not one crack in that piece of wood. And the birch bark is still on. Now it's separated a little bit because that shrinks and swells with moisture. So. Behind this door was the ag classroom. And that's where Mr. Roberts, Everett Roberts, taught ag. And I think Carl Schultz was hired first as an ag instructor. Am I correct, Mike?
Yes.
And then Everett came before me, obviously before me, and was a teacher for a long time. And now we have Dale Carlson, the current ag teacher. And we'll go down to his room in just a few minutes. But right here we have just oodles and oodles of stuff. Brings back a lot of old memories. These were things that I would buy at the hardware store and then resell to the students. Like if they were building a cabinet, needed a pair of hinges, I would have hinges, handles, knobs, things like that, cords. The cords were, when they made the lamps, what I would do is when the hardware store would put the extension cords on sale, okay, I would go buy it because it had the male plug already molded on, and we simply cut the female and string it through, and they had a lamp which was perfectly safe when they made their lamps.
And Jim was always a stickler on safety, and many students came to this shop and became in the industry of carpentry or building or something like
Right.
that. I remember the Hain boys, Tony Hain's sons, would often quote Jim on how to do something safely. In fact, that they would shorten the quotes by saying, "What would JP
do?"
Yeah, WWJP say.
You've seen
So
that about
what would
Jesus,
Jim
you know,
Patterson
what would
say?
JP do?
When
Yeah.
they were doing something dangerous, like
Yeah.
pointing a nail gun that might hit them or something like that, they always brought him up on how to do things safely, because you were a stickler on safety.
And that's one thing we did not ever have here at school was a nail gun. We did building construction here, and I'll get into that a little bit later on, but I had a picture that was in the paper. This was back in probably the mid-70s. There was somebody that was working a construction site over in the Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire area, and was going down a ladder, and someone put the nail gun and it went through his skull, and he survived. He survived. Yeah. So, you know, just the slight amount of touch can set that off.
You can see why students listen to him.
Well, this was years ago. In my desk, every year I have a rubber finger that was part of drawing for art and, you know, for body parts and so on. And I would throw that out on the table, and it was a rubber thumb, just to see what the reaction was from the kids. Yeah. Over the years, things have disappeared from the shop. I told the story last night when we were here of this tool right here. I asked the group that was here last night what this is, and it's an awl, A-W-L. It's like an ice pick, but it's used for starting holes in wood. So I take this and hit it, either with a mallet if it was a piece of hardwood or just my hand, and it would put a hole for the drill bit to go in. Well, if you remember, a number of years ago, the Maritime Museum had the Ryerson, which is a deck, flat deck. No, there's no,
Self-unloader.
self-unloader. It was a flat deck. And they had it between the two bridges, okay, for tours. And I was a volunteer at the Maritime Museum, gave tours, and lo and behold, I walked up the entryway on my first tours, and in their tool rack on the ship was one of these, painted orange, because I painted all my tools orange so that if someone found them, they would hopefully bring them back to me. Well, this disappeared from our shop and ended up on the Ryerson. And it's probably still there. That ship's up in either Superior or Duluth, I don't remember. But it has no work anymore because it's a flat deck. You looking at the vices?
Yes, I am. I was seeing if there was a date on them, because they
No.
were here when you came, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, yeah. These were all here.
And the
Yeah.
benches were here.
The benches were here too. Yep.
I have one of those little ginger jar lamps at my house that one of my boys built. And every time they come and they see the little lamp, they talk about JP in a good way.
But that was required. I mean, they had
Uh-huh.
to make that
Yeah.
sometime during the semester because you had a couple machines and not every student could be on there at the same time. So some were doing this, some were doing this, but by the end of the semester, they had to have it done.
They were nice
Yeah.
lamps, very smooth.
And the other one was that little footstool.
Oh, yeah.
Do they have the little footstool with the handle?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, these projects, and some schools, you know, they build a cabinet or something like that. But I was trying to reduce the cost to the district for materials. Because as you can see, lumber in this room is extremely expensive. Now, especially now, with the construction and the way it is right now. So,
When your husband Bob and I were in high school, we had to make a knick-knack shelf, when knickknacks were a big thing. But every generation had some type of required project.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And that's how you were graded at the end of the semester, is what your project turned out to look
right,
like.
right.
So-
One of the Michael boys, June and
Roger.
Roger, he passed away, built a foosball table in here. And he ordered the parts, you know, the metal rods and all that stuff, and he built the table, okay, which was substantial at that time, and, yeah. So there've been a lot of really neat projects that have come out here. So,
So do the students pay for the materials or not?
if it was required, at that time, the school board said if it was a cost of $2 or less, it was free to the child, to the student. If it was more than $2, let's say it was $4, they would pay $2, the school would pick up $2. So they were trying to somewhat, you know, break even on material costs and so on. So,
And instead of lamps, Jim, our project was fish clubs. We would make a club, and then melt lead in the metal shop and put some in it, so when you catch a big fish, you would
Yeah,
knock the fish.
yeah.
Oh, that was a very popular project.
oh, I know. Yes, it was. And I outlawed that for my own personal protection. Not only because of, you know, what they made. Okay, at one time, kids were into making pipes on the lathe. For you know why.
We don't want to know why.
Well, I had to confiscate, you know, if I'd catch them doing that. Kids are always trying to work the angles and so on.
Yeah.
They're
But
probably making pipes for their home plumbing, right?
No, different kind of pipe. So these were all windows at one time. They're all boarded up right now because, again, the kids in the hall would peek into the classrooms and disturb the classes. So now we're going to go into the graphic arts area and the tech ed lab. It's the area that's going to show students new technologies. This has been in existence for about 23, 24 years.
And Jim, this is the reason the wood shop got smaller.
Right.
This
Right.
became a different type of classroom.
Correct, and carpeted too. Yeah. It's very, very nice and very quiet in here with the carpeting, no question about it. That makes a major difference. But this area here, from about here over, was part of the wood shop. That's now part of this room. And these, again, were put in, and then they would have different stations for the students to work. And they would be in here for a period of about 2 weeks, and then rotate to a different station, so that everyone throughout the semester or the quarter, whatever it happens to be, the grading period, got to work on the same activities over those years. And again, this is something new. It's a laser. We never had anything like that when I was here.
But
That's
this
new.
was a computerized tech ed group then.
Yes, yes. And back behind that partition right there is the dark room. That's where they would make the large negatives that would go and eventually be making printing plates. But this is a silk screening facility. You would put your shirt or whatever you're going to silk screen, and then the screen would go on here, and then you would use the various inks and so on to, and then this would rotate.
Jim, tell us what this equipment is.
Well, that's a drawing board and T-square. Now, that drawing board was here when I came. Okay? So it's over 50 years old.
So this is what you taught drafting on.
Right. Before computers came in. Right.
And
And then as computers came in, yep,
it appears they're still referring back to this at times.
you got to teach the basics. The key is the younger children, the students, they need to be able to visualize 3D. And some kids can't, it's very difficult for them to do that. And so when you're doing a floor plan, like say for example right there that Mike's holding up, you have to be able to visualize the walls, the windows, you know, everything that's going to go into that. Now you've got the computer, you can design the floor plan, punch a button, and it draws everything for you. It's just phenomenal, the amount of advancement in technology that has happened in the last few years. Yeah. But they still got to be able to visualize three-dimensional, and that's hard for kids to do.
Recently, Jim, I reconstructed a log cabin, and a friend of mine who is a graphic engineer had to go back to this for
The
the
drawing
first
board?
time in his career to help us plan out the floor plan of that log cabin. Everything else was on the computer.
Right. You need to get the basics. Just like one of my biggest frustrations was with kids reading a ruler. They said, why are you teaching that to juniors and seniors? Because they never learned it when they were 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, you know. And we're talking down to a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, we're not talking micrometer type readings to the thousandth or 10,000ths. There's an architect scale. Yep. These were here when I came. That's how old these are. And this is a scale that, again, an architect or draftsman would use. Here's your conventional 12-inch ruler right here. But then these are different scales, 1 inch to the foot. If you have a dollhouse, a lot of the dollhouses are 1 inch to the foot. So this distance right here would represent 1 foot. This down here would be 8 feet. So that your ceiling would be 8 feet high if you're doing 1 inch to the foot. And again, that's, the basics. And we got to get kids to do the basics. You know, I was amazed when they put the digital clocks in here at school. Because a lot of kids can't tell time. I mean, you give them the analog clock, they have no idea what you're talking about. Still got the old T-square. And these were all numbered. So that when it came time to return the inventory at the end of the semester, you know, they didn't have somebody else's. Now we're going into the press room. And again, at one time there was a garage door right here that's been blocked up. That led from that addition out to the metal shop. We have different printing presses here. You can see this one is a replacement of the 1850. This is an 1860. The 1850 was purchased, I think, about 1968. And that served school for years. The school paper was printed on that. A lot of the forms for use in school were printed on here, and so on. This is a different press. We never had this one when we were here, but it's got a different color head so that you can print multicolor printing on the press. This was the remnants of one of our drafting tables. This was the storage area where kids would put their drawings and so on while they're working, and the table was in between the two. There'd be one on the right and one on the left. Here we have a paper cutter. This was here when I came. I myself got cut on this. What happened was I put the paper in to be cut, and I was in a hurry, and I did not have the guard or the clamp. This is the guard back here down far enough, and brought the knife down, and then I pulled the paper out because I realized what I did and flipped my fingernail off. It came down, took the nail, and just flipped it right off. Went to the doctor, and I went up and played volleyball that night. Wasn't very bright of me. This is our paper supply here.
Jim, I'll show them how this operates a little bit.
Oh, it's a,
What Jim was talking about, the guard coming down, came down with this,
yeah,
and then to slice the paper,
yeah. This is a guillotine type of cutter, just like you would do in France. And
That
this
swings
would
over.
do. I can't do it because of the boxes, and I don't want to move. That's all right. But anyway, it would come down and make the cut. But I just simply put the paper in, and my fingernail caught that guard, or not the guard, but the blade, because that's one blade. That's one knife.
and this might be going to the new edition.
I have no idea.
Yes, and one thing about this room, even though it's a small room, Jim, a lot of people went into the printing industry from this school.
Dennis Florer, we had a bunch of them that made
Pete
careers.
Schuster,
Yeah,
yeah.
Pete Schuster, yeah, made careers out of the graphic arts program, yep. But this one, I mean, most schools, especially in Door County, do not have graphic arts or printing programs. We started out when I first came, we did have letterpress, but not as big as these machines. And we did individual type. If you remember that, where you had to take, and pick it from, and all that technology is gone. Yep.
Over here, Jim. And let you scan this a little bit.
Yep. These stools were the old drafting stools, right here. That they kept a couple of them when they sold off the drafting tables and so on. The current tech ed instructor is Dan Sanborn. This is his main operation right here. And at one point in time, when I first came here, we had two other tech ed teachers. Norm Lenius, who also taught driver's ed, and Ray Leonardson. And the three of us worked together for a number of years. Then came in Dan Carmody, not Dan.
Kim.
Ken Carmody. Ken Carmody. I apologize. I should know that. And now, since we've retired, Mr. Sanborn, Dan Sanborn, is the tech ed teacher now. Now, we went from 3 people, and Norm was about 2.5, we considered half-time, because he was driver's ed the other half, behind the wheel and also classroom. When he retired, Daryl Severson, many of you know Daryl Severson, he came in as driver's ed. So anyway, to make a long story, I went back through one of the files in the back room and found papers from Betts, the last name was Betts, Don Betts, and Paul Alex, thank you. And when I came in 1970, I replaced Paul Alex. But he left in June, and they could not find a replacement until I came in January. So we've had, Ray and I worked together for close to 30 years before Ray retired. We were basically the department down to 2. And then when Ray retired, they hired Adam Bear to replace him. And then I left, and we were down to 1 tech ed teacher.
And Adam Bear is currently our high school
High school principal, well, actually 6 through 12, I think, or 7
Yes.
through 6 or whatever it is, middle school through high school, yeah. So you can see some of the work on the board of the school paper. It's called the CHIPS. That's the school paper. We do have an actual kind of chalkboard. I guess they call that a whiteboard now, even though it's not white.
Much like the weathermen use on television.
Yeah. This is the emergency exit out of here, outside, and this will all be gone. This whole area and this will be gone. That's part of the new addition, of course, the new school, right there. So you can see all the new computers and so on, relatively new. Oh, this is nice. I don't know if you can get a close-up of that. Country View Farms, 1883, Ed and Deb Stotts. And I had Ed, and you went to school with them.
Yes.
This wall was put in when the remodeling was done. Now, over where that workbench is, kind of in the middle, was an auto lift, where you had the telescoping arms that would come in and lift the car up, and we could work on 1 car on the lift at a time in a class period. And the other cars would be lined up behind it, depending upon how many we could get, 3 or 4 in. But that program went away. It was a consumer auto in that we did not do anything major in terms of car repair. It was all done with common, everyday things that you needed to do. Change a tire, okay? Change a headlight, tail light, oil change. The kids got to use the lift for an oil change. So There was a funny story that happened with one of the vehicles was on the lift. The oil filter is normally on the underside of the engine somewhere, right or left, doesn't, okay? Put it up, was all set to drain the oil. Where's the oil filter? It was on the driver's side fender, on the top of the fender. You know, what engineer designed that? Who knows? Never had to use it. And that's still there. Yep. This is the welding area over here. The workbenches, and these have never been replaced. These were the same when I left years ago. That one too. The garage door that's over on the end, the cars would come in up that ramp. The music section and the the gym is on the other side of that. And they would bring their cars in and we would do some work on them. And I had a checklist of each student and what they did during that class period. Now you got to remember, not every kid, if you had 15, 18 kids in class, could be working on their car, especially in the wintertime, in the shop at the same time. So we would be in the shop 2 or 3 times a week with different students doing certain activities. Over here, we have a new milling machine. The original milling machine that we had is that Bridgeport machine that's over in the corner on the right. That was here when I came. We have a metal shear right here that's used for cutting sheet metal.
That's probably World War II vintage.
No,
No.
this is relatively new. This was here when I came, but I mean it's relatively new. We used to get our coupons, that's what these are called, from the shipyard. And these pieces of steel, students would, and again, you got to be very careful because they have sharp edges, would practice welding, okay, making different types of joints and so on with these. They would have to grind an edge on it and then have room for the weld and so on, and they would be graded on how well the weld was done. And we got these from the shipyard. You can see some of the ones that are done over here. And again, to become a welder, it's practice. Practice, 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 just with any trade. This is new, so is that. And what this was to remove the acetylene and oxygen cylinders. I don't see any in here. They may not be using them anymore.
Jim, the students that learned to weld or cut with the acetylene, they could go directly to the shipyards and get a job. So
Right.
this
Yeah.
was,
At one point in time, we had, in the freshman year, they had like 6 weeks of metals, if you will call it that. It was sheet metal, machine metals, welding, foundry. We got a foundry here, I haven't got to that yet, over there. That's all gone. But they would rotate through those to get a sampling. Then in the sophomore year, they could have a semester of metals, which would go further into depth with welding, foundry, sheet metal, you know, whatever. In the junior and senior year, they could have another year. Okay, we went from 6 weeks to a semester to a year and possibly another year. Now, we didn't have separate classes for those kids. Those kids were put in with another class. But they would be doing higher level activities than the kids, let's say, who were juniors. The seniors would be a higher level. Now what the kids get, as far as I know, is 1 semester. That's it, of metals. Yeah, practice welds.
here's some practice welds on
Yep,
here.
yep.
And
can
this
see-
education fit in well with working in the shipyards because many were farm boys that had to work on the farms in the summer, and in the winter they could go to get employment in the
Exactly,
shipyard.
exactly. And you can see the 2 pieces being put together, and then again, these were just practice beads, that's what they call it, to try to get your hand steady as you're doing the welding.
They look a lot better than what I can do.
But that's, we're, you know, with one instructor, and Dale Carlson, by the way, is the instructor of metals. He also does small engines. 1 semester of the year is metals, the other semester is small engines. dealing with how to take apart a lawnmower, fix it, repair it, put it back together. One of the things, when I taught that years ago, small engines, the kids would bring in old lawnmowers, and we would put them up and work on them. The kids would take them apart, because I had to see it apart and verify it, and I would check it off. Then they would put it back together. My biggest problem, kids would steal condensers, whatever, part from another student's engine, because they didn't have one. Okay? Now, here was the trick. If they got the engine together, they got a grade, a C. If they got the engine to run for 2 minutes, we had a special, like a wooden box that they put it on. We put them outside, and they would start it, and if it ran for 2 minutes, they got an A. If it didn't run for 2 minutes, they could go back and see what was wrong, whether it was ignition, plugs or whatever, fuel or spark, one of those. What was a basic thing that you have to have going. So it motivated the kids. Some accepted the C, which was, that was their choice. But again, and that was all taught in here. But again, metals was 1 semester, and I'm not sure if it's first or second. Likewise with small engines, first or second. I don't know what the schedule is this year. This was the office in here. A lot of tools were stored, especially like micrometers. We had a tachometer that we used for checking small engines. Different measuring tools and so on were along this wall. A lot of the reference materials and books and so on were in here. But now they're getting ready to move, and they're starting to pack up a lot of stuff. So what's available now and what was back then, I don't know. But we had one whole section with just manuals, repair manuals for the woodworking machines, metalworking machines, printing presses, and so on. When I first came here back in 1970, this was my classroom. And from that point, I moved to this room, which is now part of Dale Carlson's storage room. Come on in here. This is Dale Carlson's storage area. And again, you can see he's getting boxes packed up, getting ready for the move. But this was my second room, where I taught drafting.
Jim, I came to this school in 1960 as a 6th grader. And these 3 rooms along here were elementary classrooms, rather new elementary classrooms.
They were probably put on in the 50s, I bet.
My teacher at that time was Darrell Lollizer, and that went on.
Darrell on the surgeon bay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But these were during the bump in the elementary numbers. These rooms were
After
really
the war.
needed.
After the war.
Yeah, they started closing Jacksonport, Gibraltar, Fairview, and schools, not Gibraltar, Groveland, and Fairview, and some of those schools. And the students started coming in. Some started in junior high, some started in 6th grade, and that went on. Sunny Point School was still open, Cherry School was still open, and Carlsville were still open.
Okay.
And they'd ship different grade levels to them. But these were classrooms, elementary classrooms in 1960, and the date strikes me very closely because that's the date that President Kennedy was running for president. And I think there were 3 kids in our class that were in favor of him over Richard Nixon. Okay, Jim, we're ending up our visit of the 1946 wing of the Sevastopol School here that is going to be replaced. And we're standing in the high school art room, which some of you that are watching this might think it looks a little bigger now. It is bigger. And it's been some great people that have come through here and developed their skills. Part of the storage area at one time was the 1924 boys' shower room. And today we have packing up the art materials to move on.
Many of you may remember, the old timers, Audrey Off was a student here. And Audrey has her own business downtown on 3rd Avenue.
All of you students that have gone through this part of the building, Many of the things you see here on the cabinetry and some of those things are moving along with the building. And the experiences you had here are going to be shared in the next building. And it's really kind of cool, but there'll be remnants of the past. Lisa, behind the door there, if you would bring that stool out. This stool you're looking at was from the old lines of desks that were on rails. And they reused parts of it to make a stool. And a few of those things are going along to the 2021 edition. We're not